Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. He is Daniel Gallen. We're coming to you from high atop Beaver Stadium on Saturday night following a third consecutive loss for the Nittany Lions. Behind me, if you're watching on YouTube, you see the lights behind it. And Beaver Stadium, it's a great setting, as you can see. We were here for the whiteout 2 weeks ago, and what we witnessed that night was a team that in a top 10 showdown was leading in overtime. It was the best whiteout environment I have ever encountered in my 9 seasons covering this team. And 2 weeks later, we're near the bottom of an avalanche. I guess we don't quite know how far the avalanche will go from here, Daniel, but it is getting worse and worse and worse for James Franklin and the Penn State football squad. 0-3 in Big Ten action, second consecutive loss against a team that they were considered a three touchdown favorite over. And it's a Northwestern team that ends up leaving Beaver Stadium with a 22-21 win. James Franklin, again, deja vu. Here's the Fire Franklin chants. This time they did not originate in the student section. It was more of a group effort this time around as the game came to a close. The players heard it, and ultimately this is a team that also lost their starting quarterback for the last 35 games, and Drew Allar. His career is over. We'll talk about that. We got a few things to get to, but Daniel, it's last week. I think we did, a lot of kind of yelling, for lack of a better term, because what we witnessed was so shocking. And by the way, UCLA put up a bunch of points again this week and won at Michigan State. So who knows where they are? But we know where Penn State is, and that is tremendously short of what the expectations were a month and a half ago as things got underway and preseason camp came to a close. We are verging on the territory of this being one of the all-time clunkers in recent college football memory for a team that was supposed to be a national championship contender. And quite frankly, we've had conversations here in the press box with some of our colleagues who've done this for a while. We're all wondering if this team is going to qualify for a bowl. We're to that point right now, and it feels like we are late in the season. We're only halfway through. Daniel, take the baton, take it wherever you want.
Yeah, it's getting late pretty early. For Penn State this season. That I think first thing I got to do, I had this thought right like near the end of the game. I got to give Preston Stone his due. I know I brought up his quotes from Big Ten Media Days on our Thursday pod where he said, I feel like we've got a good chance of going in there and winning that game. And, Preston, salute. You got it done in your return to Beaver Stadium. I think you look at the arc of these past 3 weeks, and I'm working on a story right now on Lions 24/7 about, kind of what's ahead. What does Penn State have left? And I framed it as 2 weeks ago against Oregon. That was the heartbreaker. Last week at UCLA, that was just a catastrophic failure. And then tonight you have the culmination of everything that we've seen these past 2 weeks, everything we've seen, through the first 5 weeks of the season in terms of, all the issues that Penn State was having, issues in every phase of the game, things that Northwestern was able to do that other teams Penn State had played were able to do. And it all just kind of came together and was punctuated with Drew Allar getting hurt at the end of the game. I can't really think of an elegant way to phrase it, but that really felt like an appropriate capper to the way things had been going. Like to have that kind of injury to one of your better players, it just felt like things were sliding and that what can go wrong will go wrong, just sliding that way. And so, I think you look at where Penn State is right now and you look at where they can go, and it's pretty bleak about what's ahead of them. I know that we had a lot of players talking about playing for pride at the end of the day, like, playing for yourself, playing for your brothers around you. Zane Durant did mention that, he doesn't take it lightly when he's wearing the Penn State logo, that really means something to him, playing for, the school and the town. But it's a very uncertain road, I think, in front of Penn State right now. And I think that it's really crazy. Like the very end of the game, it ended at, I forget exactly what time the game ended, but I went through and, I pulled up a tweet from, 6:54 p.m. 2 weeks ago before the whiteout. And you look at the scene. Yeah, this game ended at 6:46. So I went and pulled up a tweet from essentially, 2 weeks ago exactly. And you've got the full Beaver Stadium an hour before kickoff, like that sort of environment. just to have this sort of swing, I mean, it's a collapse. It's shocking. I think that, this will go down as, maybe not completely nationally, but I think in college football circles, I mean, this is going to go down as a huge disappointment for Penn State.
And honestly, there wasn't as like angry of an environment as I thought it was going to be today. Early
There weren't
on,
really enough
nothing.
people.
Right. I mean, and you talk
Yeah.
about everyone being in their seat an hour before the whiteout. And again, that was an incredible atmosphere. And I think that crowd really sensed it. For a while, it was like, oh no, here we go again when you fall down 17-3. They were leading in overtime, and it literally felt like, and around the crowd, they were one defensive stop away from having a breakthrough win, moving to 4-0, and then everything's possible. And you can maybe start to believe in those national championship aspirations, despite the kind of the lackluster 3 quarters for that matchup. But that feels like 6 months ago, not 2 weeks ago. And it was a late crowd getting in. It was a crowd that was quick to leave. And those who stuck around, again, the Fire Franklin chants came. There was, any moment where there was a bad offensive possession, and there were a few, or, they had trouble getting off the field on defense or had a personal foul penalty, boos rained down. And that's where, this fan base and this coaching staff and this regime right now, the relationship is in a very, very strained place. I said strained, not strange, because I think we have it pretty figured out. It's both of those things, but James Franklin is wearing this on his face now. He's wearing it in the way that he's discussing his thoughts. I mean, in the postgame, Daniel, it was unlike any version of James Franklin in a postgame setting I think that we've seen through his 12 seasons here. I mean, I saw the great to elite version of James Franklin after a game. I've seen, testy James Franklin after games. I've seen elated James Franklin. This was a clearly, depressed. I don't know what moment was kind of sinking in, and you could feel it. And his opening statement was, about 3 sentences long. And he went out of his way, like he typically does, to say it's on me. I take responsibility. He mentioned again, like he did last week, these are the coaches I hired. These are the players I recruited. This was my vision, essentially, and the results aren't there. But ultimately, Daniel, this started to feel a little bit more like a Wake vibe, and not just for the loss of Penn State's hopes of what the season might become. And, laugh at it if you wanted. With 2 losses, even after the UCLA game, they still had a chance to do something with a magical run. There's no magic in this team right now. There's no magic from the head coach. And that makes you wonder, again, because of the different vibes of this post-game press conference, the vitriolic nature of what he is experiencing right now with the fan base and the community. And I don't know how he can possibly win them over right now. Again, I don't know how he gets back to where he was a couple weeks ago, which may have been his peak with this program. And so, Daniel, I don't know if we're going to get another James Franklin press conference. I didn't think I'd ever be saying that here in the second week of October. But Pat Kraft, James Franklin's agent, college leadership, I'd imagine there's going to be some very uncomfortable conversations. I'd imagine some of them maybe already taking place as we record here. And I just don't know what to anticipate between now and our noon Monday press conference back here in Beaver Stadium, where for the last several years, it's been sitting down and speaking with James Franklin. Kind of crazy. I don't know that he'll be there on Monday. I really don't.
Yeah, I think the post-game presser, I think the thing that stands out to me about it, we can talk about the Drew Allar part of it in a second, but there wasn't that defiance from James Franklin that I think is a staple of not only his losing press conferences, but some of his winning press conferences too. I think he's someone who has always carried himself with an edge, and that's what you have to do in this profession. This is a very cutthroat profession. You really only get, one chance to really make it big, to do it right, to do it the way you want to. And that's always the lens that I've tried to look at how Franklin handles himself and does things through, is that, he knows that this is his best chance, to achieve what he wants to in this position. And so, and I think that part of that has been that edge that he carries, and, going into things and pushing back on things. And, maybe the things that we as media people, we think are kind of annoying, where you ask a question and he says, well, I don't think I'd phrase it like that, or I don't see it like that. That's him setting the terms. That's him, exerting himself a little bit. And we had that a little bit last week at UCLA. I mean, I think that There I was standing pretty close to him because of the setup of that press room, and you could still feel that edge. You could still feel a little bit of that anger, I guess, that after a loss that we've seen sometimes. And
Daniel, on Monday even, remember he brought up his history here. He brought up the 12 years here.
Yes.
He kept pointing to what he's accomplished and not letting these games, overwhelm that or overshadow that. That was not part of the narrative from him today.
Yeah, and he got the question a couple times. I know John Sauber asked it one way. I think someone else asked it another way. That was basically like, "Do you still want to do this? Like, do you still think you should do this?" And instead of bringing out the resume, bringing out the New Year's Six burst, bringing out the fact that they were one drive away, from playing for a national championship last year, it's all about the players in the locker room. I'm doing it for them. Like it's about them. Like there wasn't that. I think that sometimes when you say someone's being defensive, there's usually a negative connotation to it. But I think in this case, it would have been justified to see that sort of response, and that really wasn't there. And so I think my big takeaway is that not sure exactly what will happen, not sure what it will look like, not sure when it'll happen. Sure, if something happens, it'll be at an inconvenient time for all of us. But something has to happen, and something is going to happen. Things feel pretty untenable right now, and I think that it's pretty astounding, like I said, for things to fall apart this quickly, where less than a month ago, you're the number 2 team in the country. 2 weeks ago, you're in a heavyweight fight with a team that a lot of people consider to be the best team in the country, most talented team in the country, with a chance to beat them. And now UCLA, Northwestern, and we're here.
I mean, 2 weeks ago, he was sitting on the game day set on Old Main Lawn, king of the castle here at Penn State. And there's a scenario here where he won't have access to the Lash building in a few weeks or in a few days. And that's just whiplash, man. It is whiplash is probably the way I would describe that. In this game itself, not only did you suffer this third consecutive loss, another embarrassing defeat, and Chris Hummer posted a stat that Penn State was unbeaten in the last 3 seasons against anyone who wasn't ranked inside the top 11. I know there's been so much focus on James Franklin not beating those top-ranked teams, but we keep reminding you too, he doesn't lose to anybody else. Well, that has been blown up, obviously, the last couple of weeks, stacked on top of the Oregon loss, which was more the kind of loss that people are accustomed to at James Franklin. These are very uncharacteristic. And then in the postgame press conference, like you said, he is a fierce defender of what he has built here. He's a fierce defender of what they're trying to do in that building. That fire was not present in his eyes, in his words, in postgame today. And I understand it's not an easy thing to go up there, but James Franklin has always presented himself in that kind of a way. And him not doing that this time around, as you kind of laid out there, it makes your eyes pop a little bit, and it does, kind of get your senses up about what's next for him, what's next for the program. And I'm talking to a few of you here in the press box, like this feels like a conversation and a kind of vibe that you have like Thanksgiving week at the end of a rough season. And yet you look at the calendar, they're going to Iowa next week for a primetime game in Iowa City, Kinnick Stadium. Iowa just ripped Wisconsin to shreds. Then you got a bye week. Then you've got Ohio State on the road. Then you're back here playing Indiana. Indiana just went out and beat Oregon on their home field. I mean, it's hard not to forecast a potential 3-6 scenario right now, which is just unbelievable. And then you lose one more game and you're not getting invited to any kind of bowl. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we got to acknowledge that QB1 is no longer part of the plan. Drew Allar, 35th career start this Saturday, and he got hurt with about 3 minutes to go in this game. Penn State on a third down play. He took off, got hit kind of on his left ankle, shin area, lower leg. We don't know the specifics of this, but he needed help getting to the sideline after staying down for a while. He was ultimately carted off the sideline toward the locker room. There was enough evaluation somehow between then and when James Franklin met with us. I don't know if that was about a 45-minute span to an hour. It wasn't much time where James Franklin was able to say, yeah, Drew is out for the season. And when you're a senior quarterback, that means his college career is over. here at Penn State. I still view him as kind of the kid who showed up here as the number one prospect in the country, hopped on the podcast with us a couple of times when he was in high school during his big rise up our rankings. And there was so much discussion about where the program was going to go next with Drew taking over for Sean Clifford a few years back. Ultimately fell short of expectations, and it's going to be a defining theme with James Franklin. But your heart goes out to Drew Allar, because I thought when we've been looking for signs of fire from this team, he showed it against UCLA. He showed it late against Oregon. It has been an inconsistent up and down senior campaign for Drew Allar. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, especially when he's firmly in the discussion preseason for the Heisman Trophy, for first-round NFL draft status. Right now, though, it's a really, really tough pill to swallow for the Penn State community, who had such high hopes for this kid. He was kind of the prince who was promised in some ways for a lot of people. And you wonder what his legacy will be 3, 4, 5 years down the road when people look back at this span, at this era of Penn State football. But in this exact moment, you just wish Drew well, and you kind of read the faces that you talk to. And this is going to be a tough loss from a lot of different angles for this team. In the locker room, I don't know how strong the overall leadership of this locker room is right now. I think it's tough to say it's great, but compared to the last few years. I know Drew was kind of a linchpin piece of that process. Obviously, he is the guy who's been getting a ton of first-team reps. I mean, he has been your guy for a long time, a couple different coordinators, and now you've got to pass the baton to Ethan Grunkemeyer. Before we get to Grunkemeyer, though, Daniel, what do you make of what this means moving forward for Drew Allar, for Penn State, and ultimately, what do you make of his career? I know we'll get into it probably later, and we'll have more time to discuss it. But this is it for him. All of a sudden, suddenly he went from a guy trying to lead a comeback drive with a few minutes to go in Beaver Stadium to, he's a former college athlete now.
Yeah, I think what I alluded to earlier, the one thing that really made it seem like that this wasn't a normal James Franklin press conference was the fact that he went out and just said Drew is done for the year. He doesn't rule anyone out for the year. I know that's been a little bit of sometimes a source of frustration for people with the definition of long-term injury and always leaving that door open. But for him to come out and say that was different. And, I think a straight answer was something that we weren't really prepared for in that situation. When Allar went off, I mean, that ankle was pretty swollen and pretty, banged up, based on a photo from Grace Brennan down on the sidelines and what Mark Brennan saw. And so, we'll see. I mean, I think that with Allar, it's going to be interesting what we learn in the future, because at a certain point, he's going to graduate from the college football ecosystem into the NFL ecosystem. And that's where you see, different injury news. Like we had the whole thing with Abdul Carter last year in terms of, he was playing through something. He had this stress fracture that we didn't know about. And I think that Allar is going to be a prominent enough prospect that he's going to be under the microscope. And it's going to be interesting what we learn, like what NFL scouts, GMs are comfortable sharing with, their, reporters of choice, what they want out there, what Allar's future agent wants out there. It's going to be a very compelling story to follow in the future from that perspective. I know that there are some questions like, can he get a medical red shirt? Could he come back? I think that when you talk to a guy that said that, when he said he was coming back last year, he wasn't completely, sure that there was still a chance he could have gone based on how the playoff went and what this guy has been building towards. Yeah, I don't see that happening.
No. And I mean, what makes it even? It's not fair to Drew. It just is what it is. Yeah. But the Bo Prabula situation at Missouri, that's piled on top of this, and it makes it, even more of a rough look for a lot of people.
Look, but Bo Prabula can throw back-breaking interceptions late in the fourth quarter too. He showed that
there you
today. I kid, but yeah. So it's, I think, an interesting situation moving forward from that perspective, like our media perspective. But I think that in terms of this, I mean, you feel bad. We talked about it this week that on our call with Allar on Wednesday that he seemed loose. He seemed really with it, even after that game against UCLA, I think the fact that it wasn't talking to him wasn't like a funeral, and it wasn't like pulling teeth, mixing metaphors there, but mixing similes, but it was different. And so I think that you hoped a little bit that maybe moving forward that maybe some pressure had been taken off, maybe something had been unlocked a little bit. Didn't really look like that today for the most part. I thought the offense still looked the same. Like 6 and 9 for like 35 yards in the first half, 42 yards in the first half, like not pretty offensively. And I think the thing that it just felt, what really felt bad is that it just felt like one of those, like when it rains, it pours moments where like everything is going wrong. Like what's one more thing that can happen to you that's going wrong? And it just happens to happen to like your most important player and someone that, personally, like his expectations personally, I mean, you could almost say that the expectations on him were higher than they were for Penn State, because Penn State's the expectations of Penn State was you can win a national championship. Expectations on Drew Allar coming into the year for some people were win a national championship, also win the Heisman, also be a potential, top 5 number 1 pick in the NFL next year. Like, individually, he was shouldering so much coming into this year, and to have it end in that manner, I think is pretty brutal. I know that a couple like down the road, it will be interesting to see how he's remembered, because there isn't really that moment that you can hang your hat on with him in terms of this is the guy. I think that if you want to talk about moments like that, it's like his home debut against Ohio, where you were like, oh, they have him. Like, this is the guy. This is the savior. Like, he's going to do it.
Both season openers against West Virginia, right?
Yeah.
But the signature moment's not there, unfortunately. You're right. And when I remember when he first popped up in that opener against Purdue on the road, when Sean Clifford had to come to the sideline, he stepped up. I think he threw a pretty pass there, and everyone's just like, ooh, this is going to be a fun, like, buckle up. This is going to be a hell of a ride. We finally got this quarterback. And I know people thought Christian Hackenberg was going to be that guy, but, you had the scrappy Trace McSorley, a 3-star guy. You had Sean Clifford, who was a fighter, but he had his limitations as well. And Drew Allar was supposed to be the one, as we discussed earlier, to raise the ceiling. And for it to end this way with him leaving on a card and hearing Fire Franklin chants during that process, it's like, just watching the collapse of this whole dream. And I think that's just a really double gut punch right now. But we also have to be honest, Daniel, you're not losing someone who was running this offense and putting together tremendous production for you. We don't know what it looks like with Ethan Grunkemeyer. We have a lot of questions about Andy Kotelnicki and his plan at this point, and generally what they want to accomplish on offense, because it just has not come to fruition. But Allar today, on the day, had 137 passing yards. That's the same amount of passing yards he had in the Oregon matchup. The first 6 possessions offensively, he had 63 passing yards. He had 1 interception. And it was on that first possession where, oh my gosh, it feels like they're going to grab momentum, actually have a fast start here. Deny Dennis Sutton, blocks a punt. Second game in a row, he does that. Penn State gets the ball around the 30-yard line for Northwestern. You give the ball to Katron Allen a few times, and oh my gosh, look, things are trending in the right direction. Katron's the primary back for you. He's running the ball well. You're into the red zone, and then second down and 2, I think it was, Drew Allar looks in the direction of Liam Clifford in the end zone. Didn't have a chance on the pass, intercepted, returned 30 yards, and the rest of the game is just kind of the same kind of struggle that we've seen for different stretches for this offense and for Drew Allar. And on the season, 6-game sample size, he pretty much played the entire game today until the final offensive snap when we saw Ethan Grunkemeyer drop back. He was lined up alongside Katron Allen for a 4th and 3, ended up taking off, trying to run, was stopped short of the first down. Northwestern runs out the clock the rest of the way. But Drew Allar in those 6 games, his highest total for passing yards, 217 in game 1 against Nevada. He didn't throw more than 2 touchdowns in any game this season. And, he finishes his career, I think, top 5 for touchdown tosses, 61 of those for passing yards in a career, about 7,400 of those. But ultimately, let's be real, you're not in a situation where you have to replace someone who is putting up 300 yards and 3 touchdowns a game. You're going to have to replace a lot, I think, mentally and from a leadership standpoint and from an experience standpoint. But unfortunately for Drew and the way the season went, these are not the most gigantic shoes to fill from an offensive efficiency standpoint moving forward.
Definitely. I think that maybe the floor now is maybe a little lower. I mean, it was sort of low with how
The
Aller
floor
had been
wasn't looking
playing.
great. Yeah.
And with Grunkemeyer, that's just like the unknown. But I think we had seen where the ceiling was for this offense, and maybe Grunkemeyer changes things somehow. Maybe now you have the opportunity for a higher ceiling. I mean, I still think that taking your third year starter, the senior, with all that talent, I think that there's no way I can say that Penn State is a better team right now. Like, I can't say that they're better off. Like, that would be very insincere of me. But they can be different now. And maybe that helps them along the way. I think to go back though to that, talk about the game flow a little bit and talk about that interception. We had talked a lot about like what's the beginning of this game going to look like, because you can make the case against UCLA that like they lost it in those first 7 minutes, where UCLA elects to take the ball first, scores, onside kick, 10-0. First quarter's half over before you get out there. And we said coming into this environment, which could be hostile, could be toxic, that if you go out there and you let Northwestern drive down the field on that first possession and score, or you lay an egg on your first 2 drives, that you're putting yourself in a very bad spot, both in terms of game flow, but also in terms of perception, everything else that's going around this program right now. And I really felt that first drive, they're checking all the boxes of what we talked about. It's like defense gets off the field, you block the punt, like you've got the momentum, you're feeding Katron Allen, 3 carries, 15 yards, like you're getting there. And it feels like, man, you score this touchdown, that weight is lifted, you're off and running. And to have that interception in that spot was just so deflating. I know that there'd been, going fast had been a topic of conversation this year in terms of something that would work sometimes for Penn State. We'd also seen some times where it hadn't worked, and it felt like one of those situations where things got really rushed. And then it was just just bad throw in a bad spot, bad play. And I think after that, like, you gave Northwestern like that lease on life. Like, you gave that opening, you let them believe. Like, I think against UCLA last week, it was letting them get that onside kick. And then today it was not being able to convert there, letting them score first, letting them set the terms. I think that really, let them believe, and you open the door. I think that Northwestern, like, I don't think they're a particularly good team, but I think that they're one of those bad teams with a high floor, if that makes sense, where there's a level of competence there that can get you if you're not on top of things. And I think that's ultimately what happened to Penn State today.
This is a team that has just seemed so tight. For even during non-conference play, they seem tight. And you're right. Maybe there's a big exhale. You'd hear some, the Beaver Stadium crowd probably exhales a little bit in that moment. Instead, that interception opens the floodgates for the first time to a bunch of boos from the crowd. It wasn't the last time, but it was the first time. And that tightness was back again. That was present along the way. We've got to get to the defense, though, because, I mean, the offense late, Drew Allar has a first down run, or I should say a third down run to pick up a first down. Ultimately, he ends up punching it in on a 1-yard run after Katron Allen, gets it down near the goal line. But you can't get the defensive stop after these drives. I mean, we saw it against UCLA. They kept narrowing the margin to 7 points. And until the Zakee Wheatley stop on the 4th down try for UCLA deep in their territory, they were just marching down the field and responding and expanding the lead again. This time around, Northwestern goes the distance, makes it a 22-21 game. But all game long and all Big Ten schedule long now, Daniel, they've had trouble getting off the field. Even that Oregon matchup, when they were limiting them to 3 points through almost three quarters, Oregon was dominating time of possession. Part of that is 3 and outs on offense, but part of that is third down conversions that you're surrendering. And, doing the math there, going back to the Oregon overtime possessions through the UCLA game, through this game against Northwestern, they're giving up points on about 70% of opposing possessions. And when we want to do the whole thing where when you close your eyes back in August and you forecasted what everything would look like, yeah, you thought Drew Allar had the chance to make a significant step. You thought this offense would certainly look a lot more polished. But I think we thought you'd be able to hang your hat on the defense, that when the offense wasn't on its A game, and it hasn't been very often this year, they could get bailed out. We saw Manny Diaz's defense do that. Heck, we saw Tom Allen's defense do that occasionally last year as well. They have not had that response. And when you talk to defensive players, they do not seem comfortable with where they're at. I'm just going to be honest. And James Franklin clearly wasn't leading up to this game. He said that they're not playing as fast or as aggressive as they have in years past. It's certainly not when you want to hear when you go out and pay someone to be the highest paid coordinator in history after he wins a championship with your most hated team here in the Big Ten. But that's where they are at midseason. This is not a good team. They're 0-3 against Power 4 opponents and in the Big Ten. And it's not a good defense. It's certainly not a great defense. And they've had that over the years where even Brent Pryce last year, before he heads out of, their top 10 in a lot of important categories defensively, James Franklin has always kind of prided himself when he hires a new coordinator. I remember he mentioned it when they hired Manny Diaz, when they hired Tom Allen, when they hired Jim Knowles. It's, you're not coming in here to start from scratch. We have a tradition. We have a foundation. You're going to be part of it. But this is what we do at Penn State. We play great defense. That's gone off the rails now. And that, to me, is one of the things that's almost as difficult to digest as Andy Kotelnicki and the offense's failure, considering their continuity, is that Jim Knowles shows up in January. He talked to us how he viewed himself as, maybe he could be that missing piece for a national championship run here. I mean, right now they're playing the worst defensive football we've seen in at least a few years.
Yeah, Tyler, I know on Thursday when we were talking, you laid things out very well when I said that I couldn't get worked up about the wide receiver stuff and them not playing. This was why. Like, coming out of that UCLA game, I didn't really care what the 5th and 6th wide receiver were up to when your defense can't stop anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it was pretty alarming to hear that we're not playing fast. We're not comfortable in the scheme. We're not, we're not on top of things, considering everything else that went into the Jim Knowles hire, what we'd heard from Ohio State, and then the fact that this was a team that was built for right now. It wasn't built for 2027 when guys are in the scheme and you've recruited and you've gotten them, brought them up through it. I mean, you had a ton of seniors, ton of guys who needed to play right now. And, I do think that UCLA was a particularly bad matchup with Nico Iamaleava and Dom DeLuca. That contrast didn't work out for Penn State. But just to see this defense, they need to get a stop on that last drive. Penn State goes up 21, the last two drives really. Penn State goes up 21-16, and it was just knife through butter, going down the field. I was writing about it in my story, and I went back to look at the drive at the play-by-play, and I was like, oh, that felt like one of those drives where they've gotten 3rd and long a lot, and they made some really nice plays. No, there's one 3rd down conversion on that whole drive. It was just picking up chunks, keeping it moving, getting it down there. Nice play by the running back with some nice running second effort to get into the end zone. And this defense was just not really there today in certain spots. And it is just, I think, really befuddling. And that's something that you're really going to be thinking about, moving forward in terms of, what things were the most disappointing this year. I think it's easy to point to the quarterback, easy to point to the offense. That's fun. That's flashy. I want to see Drew Allar air it out. Everyone else wants to see Drew Allar air it out too. But this defense just has not really been playing, championship caliber defense. And a big staple, you talk about Manny Diaz, you talk about Tom Allen, with the exception of that Michigan game in 2022 and the Ole Miss game in the Peach Bowl, but I always put that in a separate bucket. The staple of these Penn State defenses and in losses, it was just they're going to stand on their head until they just can't anymore. And that's what the Oregon game looked like, where, they held them down until that fourth quarter, and then it just got away. Oregon made the plays, like the offense didn't pick them up. These past 2 weeks, like it has not been that at all. It's been uncharacteristic, of what we've seen under James Franklin over the past 4 seasons. And to me, like that was just really like that really stood out to me, was pretty alarming. I know that honestly, like I didn't think it was the biggest deal to have some form of dud after that Oregon game, given the letdown, what you did in that game to get to that point. Obviously, it was a lot worse than we really could have imagined. But yeah, I mean, it's just the defense has just been really, really disappointing. I know Zane Durant, I think, mentioned to you when you're in the scrum that they simplified some things for the defensive front. I mean, I think that's probably above our pay grade a little bit when it comes to the responsibilities and scheme. But to hear that, like it just kind of paints a picture of a defense that when I got time for Big Ten play, despite being really good in the non-con, just wasn't really ready for prime time.
It's going to be a third consecutive Sunday film session with Jim Knowles where you're reviewing a loss where you make some defensive plays, you can avoid that loss. For as poorly as the Penn State offense played for much of the Oregon game, they were in a position to win that game late and could not deliver a stop here with the support of the crowd. And then we know UCLA, they were simply overwhelmed by the UCLA offense out in Pasadena. And then today, again, sustained drives, struggles getting off the field. Penalties were a huge issue for Penn State today. That also surfaced in some other areas, but primarily on defense, personal fouls, face masks, offsides, just started to stack up. But I'm going to take a moment, since you brought up my comments on the receivers, to segue over there, because Daniel, does this seem like an offensive plan that should be sticking to its starting lineup of these particular receivers?
I mean, Devontae Ross came to play today. And
receivers, not receiver.
Yeah, and that's about it. I mean, yeah, I'm definitely in the camp of like, yeah, you got to see what the young guys can do, especially on a day like today, where it just felt like a slog. Like, I think the word I used in one of my stories was today was just pretty dismal. Like, it got a little overcast at one point, like the sun went away, and it just got really, really sloggy. And I think Katron Allen was giving you some juice. Devontae Ross gave you a little bit of a spark. No one else was really doing anything on offense. And, I do think that that's the type of situation where do something different, try something different with one of those guys. But I think on a day when you do the offense did enough to win today. I felt like that, they put the defense in position to, we're ahead now. You guys just have to stop this offense that has Preston Stone as its quarterback, that is lost its top running back for the season earlier this year. Get off the field and go. And defense couldn't do it. And then, of course, the offense did have its last chance, and that was a disaster with Allar getting hurt, Grunkemeyer trying to pull the ball down and run and getting stopped. But yeah, I think that in terms of seeing something different from the offense today, yeah, we saw Katron Allen more featured, getting the ball first, really setting the tone. I think that was welcome. But yeah, I think overall, in terms of a unit that we felt needed to go back to the drawing board a little bit and maybe do something different, given what they'd shown the past couple of weeks, yeah, it was not there. And I think if you watch Brendan Cam, you'll see Kobe Howard and Tyseer Denmark in there, during the alma mater and getting into the locker room pretty quickly.
How's this experience been for them? You just have to wonder right now. And then the college football, with the power of players and their ability to move on from a situation pretty quickly, how are they digesting this? Because they watched Liam Clifford, bump up his snaps. He went from 5 last week to whatever it was last week, to about 13 snaps. He was targeted on that interception. The rest of the guys, here's your stat line among pass targets for this game. Devontae Ross, 7 catches, 115 yards. He had a big 67-yard gain that he did much of the work. Allar hit him in stride, set them up down the field. It kind of atoned for a lost fumble earlier in the game. Nick Singleton, 2 catches, 6 yards. Trevor Pena, 2 catches, 5 yards. Kyron Hudson, 1 catch, 10 yards. He had a drop. Katron Allen, 1 catch, 1 yard, not a single tight end reception. And obviously, we got to acknowledge quarterback play, offensive coordinator, scheme
Offensive
design.
line.
It's offensive line. It's all in there. But man, I kind of my point I was trying to make earlier in our pregame podcast coming out the week. James Franklin kind of treated my question like I was asking about Lyric Samuel and Matt Outen, not guys that he has gone and say these are our number 2 wide receivers at these positions clearly. So they don't take a peek at these guys. 6 combined snap in the last 5 games. I'm not going to go down the road too much here, but this is not an offense that, in my mind, shouldn't be, it needs to be making room for new playmakers. It needs to be trying new things. And I disagree a little bit. I don't think 21 points is enough to win a game, just to hang your hat on in the Big Ten. Was it enough to win this game at the end? Yeah, it could have been an ugly win where your quarterback throws for 137 yards and you say, wow, they looked like crap, but they won. So they got the 4-2. 21 points ain't going to cut it. I mean, not for this offense, not for this coordinator, not with the group. I mean, let's not pretend they haven't recruited at a high level and they're not paying a lot of these guys at a high level. And this is the result. So I think Kotelnicki's in question now. You're going to have a new quarterback involved. But how about with that new quarterback, you maybe try out some new playmakers on the field? All due respect to what Liam Clifford brings you, maybe in the locker room, certainly on special teams. Next 6 games, I don't think are time to showcase Liam Clifford. I think you maybe take a look at what else you've got. Katron Allen was interesting. He had 9 carries, the first 9 carries at the running back position today, turned those into 59 yards and a touchdown. I mean, even when there wasn't space, he was making things happen with whether it was making a cut or just running through guys. It's kind of the thing that Nick Singleton has really struggled to do when there's not space. And then you saw Nick Singleton get 7 consecutive carries. He turned them into 20 yards and a touchdown as well on a 4th down play that he got outside on the left side edge. But this was a game where you look at the final stat sheet at running back, and again, it kind of just further reminds you of where things are. Nick Singleton ended up staying at that stat line, 7 carries, 20 yards, a touchdown, a 2.9 average. And then Katron Allen at a 5.6 average, 16 carries, 90 yards, and a touchdown. But that was just a subplot today. It really just was. And I do wonder, there was some moments there where, maybe Katron Allen's the answer. There's a few of those, especially when we were 4th and 3. And I think you turned to me and said, what do you do here? Because Grunkemeier's thrown into a 4th and 3 situation. You need to pick it up. And I'm almost thinking, man, maybe just put the ball in the hands of Katron Allen. And if he can't get through a tackle and the offensive line can't help him out, at least it's in his hands and he can make something happen, where you're putting Nathan Grunkemeier in for his first rep since late in the Villanova game. He played late in the Nevada game. He's never experienced anything like this in his college football career. He's never even been in a Big Ten game, and you're asking him to drop back on a 4th and 3 pretty quickly. Whatever he saw downfield wasn't working for him. He's felt the pressure. He tucked the ball and ran. And I think that's the risk you're going to run when you go and elect to put it in his hands versus Katron's hands there. But that's kind of, at this point, hindsight's 20/20 on the subject, and they didn't play good enough to win. They shouldn't have been in that kind of situation if they're the team that we thought they were. And I think ultimately, Daniel, as we kind of wrap up this episode, what now? I mean, because like I said, it feels like we're late in the season, and yet we're only at the midway point. We still got another bye week ahead of this team, and we just have not seen the adjustments to this stage, at least to the naked eye, that would lead you to believe that this staff truly did an autopsy on itself coming out of the Oregon game, the UCLA game, and determining, hey, we need some significant changes here. I mean, we've heard about maybe some dumbing down some of the complexities on defense, but the shift to Katron Allen was also nice to see, but it was still clunky. It was still lacking points at the end of a lot of these drives. And defensively, same deal, not getting off the field, giving up key drives late. And so I just wonder what's next. And I guess with the, of course, looming in the background, is James Franklin going to still be driving the car moving forward?
Yeah, I think that from like the big picture, like what's next, I think that's definitely like a we'll see when it comes to James Franklin. I do think if we're talking what's next and you keep everything the same and we're going into Iowa and we're like, okay, like what needs to be different, like what should be different. I think that really going from UCLA to this week, like the things that stood out to me, just being here, watching this game once, not going back through it. mean, I think the biggest differences that you saw were Katron Allen getting more involved offensively. I think that was really the only big difference offensively. I think that, maybe there's some scheme stuff that, might be above me a little bit. But then defensively, you saw AJ Harris leave the game after he got beat for a 29-yard touchdown. That was on my list of things to ask James Franklin after the game, but obviously that was a little trivial based on how things went. And so we don't know if that was injury related or performance related. But that was a difference. And then I think from a scheme perspective, I think this was probably a matchup based thing. We saw a ton of Keon Wiley today. We saw a ton of 4-3. And when Penn State went into the 4-3, Dejon Lane came on at safety for King Mac. But really, that's what we're talking about. That was different from last week, from a team that talked a ton about looking in the mirror, reflecting, trying to turn things around. I think that there's definitely an element of stubbornness in terms of, the way that Penn State has gone about these past 3 weeks. And in the past, that's worked. For them, being stubborn has yielded different results. But I just think that it felt pretty disappointing to see what we saw last week in Pasadena and then what we saw today in State College. And those games were 3,000 miles apart physically, but in terms of what we saw from the Nittany Lions, it felt very close together. So I just think that, maybe they're trying to get to the bye week before they have to do the autopsy, something like that. But it just didn't feel different enough. It just didn't really feel like enough was done to put this team in a position to win today. And we saw the consequences of that.
You start to just wonder, is this who they are? Is this the team? I think, the expectations have fallen so far and crashed with a thud here. But I think we were still, even through much of that UCLA game, maybe even after a little bit, so much of the conversation for us was looking through them with the lens of, this is the best personnel, this is the best staff, this is the best roster that James Franklin has had in 12 years. They're bought in on being a national championship contender. So are a lot of us. And then I think we've got to stop looking through that lens, and we realized that. And now it's starting to be like, did we just watch two very average, mediocre Big Ten teams play today, and teams that are, not really part of the conversation of that upper crust in the conference this year for whatever reason? And your record is what it is. You're 0-3 in this conference now. There's no layups. We said that last week, and certainly now that's been confirmed. But it's hard to see where this team comes up for air and gets a chance to feel better about itself unless they are able to generate something internally in the next 5-6 days in the Lash building. And the last couple of times they've told us they were going into the lab to find answers, they didn't bring them to the field.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing from you is we're all going to pick them to lose at Kinnick, and they're going to come out and win. But no, I mean, I think that we talked a lot about going into this year. Something that I thought about a lot was, I was not going to pick them to beat Ohio State no matter what, because that's been the trend. I got to see it to believe it. And something else that I think we talked about early this season was, what are things that we see in the non-con that are blemishes that will carry over to Big Ten play? I think we talked a lot about that 2021 season and how informative that was to us, that we saw those red flags. I was probably ignoring them. I think a lot of people were ignoring them early on, and then it came home to roost down the stretch. And so I think that there were some things early this season that, we were kind of well, they can get it fixed for Big Ten play, or this will click in for Big Ten play. And it really didn't. That, there wasn't the 75% of the offensive playbook that they were hiding, that they're going to break out the good plays, finally. So I think it's something maybe down the road we'll have a mea culpa episode, and we can go through every single thing we were wrong about going into the season.
That list is getting pretty long.
I know. I think that might be a 2-hour episode at that point. But I just think that when you project things forward, I mean, I think that you just keep lowering that floor. I think things are already ugly. Things are already messy. And the one thing that I think we've learned about being around college sports for as long as both of us have is that things can always get worse. Like there's not like a rock bottom. I was joking with you. I was like, man, like I used up all the big words last week after the UCLA game. I was like, this is a catastrophe. This is a disaster. This is a debacle. And then we get to today, and it's like it wasn't quite as spectacular as a failure as last week was, but it was still bad. And it's kind of like, shoot, like this was worse. And I didn't think it would be worse. So that's a long-winded way of saying that, like, this has just it's been bad, I think. Like, very surprisingly bad, too. I think that when we have that mea culpa episode, we can talk about the way that Penn State went about it in terms of these are our goals, a little less 1-0 out there. Personally, externally, I'm still fine with that. Like, I think that
I liked it. It gave me confidence in this team.
It felt like we were being leveled with, where it was like, hey, like the elephant in the room over there, we see it too. You're not looking at it, and we're not, gaslighting you by being like, what? That's not there. And so I think for things to turn out this way, I think that we're going to be sorting through the lessons for a while. But I mean, I don't want to end on like a total like doomer and like gloomy note, but like, yeah, like things can always get worse. And thankfully our loyal subscribers at Lions 24/7 will always remind us of that. And I think that they're probably way ahead of me at this point too.
Yeah, the message board is off and running with a whole lot of stuff right now on Saturday night, and we appreciate everyone's passion always over at Lions247.com. We'll continue to do our job here, and it's going to be an interesting next 7 weeks. There's a bye week sprinkled in there, but yeah, 6 games ahead of this team. We'll be back in Beaver Stadium on Monday for a press conference. As I said, are we 100% sure James Franklin's going to be joining us this time around? It's so strange to be saying that, but we know when they hit the field next Saturday, number 15 at quarterback won't be there. This is really could be a moment that you don't forget for a long time. This week, this weekend, the last 7 or 8 days here in Penn State football history, and what they mean for not just this regime and this era of Penn State football, but moving forward, where expectations are going to be, and how quickly can they get back to reset things to where they were in early September and late August, because that's where James Franklin had always imagined they'd be. And then they've fallen off the cliff in such a hurry here in 2025. That's going to do it for us here on the Postgame Podcast. Daniel Gallen, Tyler Donahue here in Beaver Stadium. Check out our content over at Lions247.com. We've got some comments on Ethan Grunkemeyer, on Drew Allar's injury, a report card from Mark Brennan, a lot of different stuff over there for you to check out. Video of what the post-game scene looked like on the field going into the tunnel over at Lions247.com. For now, saying goodnight from Beaver Stadium, this has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.